So I'd like everybody to take a nice big deep breath and let it all go. I am here only to be truly helpful. I am here to represent him who sent me. I do not have to worry about what to say or what to do because he who sent me will direct me. I am content to be wherever he wishes, knowing he goes there with me. I will be healed as I let him teach me to heal. Amen. All right, so as promised, we are going to have our 50-year anniversary celebration and history class from Toastmasters, from the Course of Miracles. This was 50 years since it was published. So 50 years ago, on October of 1975, the Course of Miracles was published. Today, pardon me? Okay, thank you. We're waiting for somebody else to come.
October.
Yes. Yeah. No. No talking. Get over here. We paused the class just for you. Food over there. Yeah. All right, so today we are celebrating that miraculous day when the course had finally gotten written and then published. This is when the course became a book to share with the world. But so much took place before that day. In 1965, Helen and Bill had that famous moment where there must be another way was said between them. They were in a business where there was all kinds of arguing in business meetings, and every time they'd go into a meeting, it was horrific and horrible. And one day as they were entering one of their meetings, it was Bill that said, there must be another way. And Helen agreed with him, which didn't happen very often because they never got along very well. With that, shortly after that, the course started coming through Helen. She insisted to Jesus, oh, I'm sorry, I kind of got ahead of me. I'm going to kind of go back and forth a little bit occasionally because the stories sort of cross over. But shortly before she came to the course, Helen was interested in a position, and she insisted to Jesus that she was going to have this position. And to her dismay, she was told, oh, no, you're not. Which she was not a very happy camper, because Helen was sort of ornery and very opinionated, and she wanted what she wanted. But shortly after that, a friend suggested that she apply for a job with Bill Thetford. When she walked in for the interview, she heard a voice in her head that said, this is the person you need to help. They began to work together. Their relationship was strained, and their negative working conditions at Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center were very challenging. Yeah. At one point, as they were about to go into yet one more awful meeting, again, Bill said, there must be another way, and Helen agreed. Shortly after that, they began to work. Well, I already read part of that. All right. So shortly after that, Helen began to hear a voice, and it began with, this is a Course of Miracles. Please take notes. She was very frantic because she was a psychologist, and here she's starting to hear voices, which did not sit really well with her. So she immediately called Bill and said, I'm hearing this voice. What should I do? And he basically said, maybe you should write down what it said. So she did. And he said, the next morning you can bring the notes in and we'll go over them. And she did. And as the story goes, a lot of times when Helen would come in with her notes, she was, especially at the beginning of this experience, she was very unsettled with the whole process. Again, she was a therapist, and these voices are happening in her head. So oftentimes they would literally sit at the typewriter, Bill would be holding her hand with one hand and he would be typing out the notes with the other hand. I will do my best. Thank you. He was holding her hand because she was so uncomfortable with this whole process. Yeah. All right. So Bill asked her what the voice was like. She said, "It is hard to describe. It cannot be a hallucination, really, because the voice does not come from outside. It's all internal. There's no actual sound, and the words come mentally, but very clearly. It's kind of an interdictation, you might say. I'm perfectly aware of what I am doing." But she was obviously very unsettled with the whole situation. She definitely did not want to do this, and she was resentful and infuriating with the whole thing. And I'm sure if any one of us had that experience, it would be difficult to all of a sudden be put in that position. Oh, the text came first. Yep. I think there's a very beginning part that describes a little bit. That was not part of the course, but as soon as it was the miracle principles that came through first, after there must be, this is a Course of Miracles. Yeah. Well, open the book and you'll see it. There's a little tiny paragraph. There's nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Yep. Yep. All right. So she did describe her voice. She experienced skepticism, inner conflict. And at the time, she was the associate professor of medical psychology at Columbia University and considered herself to be an atheist who viewed spiritual or channeled material as rubbish. And for those of you who are not familiar with the concept of channeled material, there's a variety of ways it can come through. Like Edgar Cayce heard a voice, but he was unconscious. I mean, it's almost like he went into a sleep state. Do you describe it as a sleep state, Herb? I know you're familiar with Edgar Cayce. That he was not conscious of what the words were that came through. For Helen, she was conscious the entire time. It just came through her. She did shorthand, so she would write it down in shorthand. This made the process very uncomfortable for her, but she never stopped the dictation. Despite her personal resistance to the content implications of for her own life, she believed in her heart that the source was true and viewed it as a special assignment. At one point, she even asked Jesus, "Why me? Why not a priest or a nun or some holy person?" And the response that she got was, "Because she would." And that was her ultimate acceptance of her role as a scribe for the book, despite her initial reluctance. You'll find out shortly. Okay, so you can see that this was quite a struggle for Helen. Eventually, she relaxed into the role as a scribe, but it took some time. And initially, she would use different words than Jesus would give her. She would change sentences when she felt like it. But oftentimes, once she did that, a couple days later, he would say, "Okay, go back to such and such a page. That wasn't the right word," or whatever, and he would help her along. So every evening she would scribe what Jesus told her and bring it back to work the next morning. Before work, they would sit down and go through the process of her reading her notes and Bill typing them. This went on for 7.5 years and over 100 notebooks. Can you imagine doing something like that that took 7.5 years that you really weren't all that thrilled about doing? And she was committed, yes.
But how did she know it was Jesus, or that all of the messages that she was getting was from that source as opposed to other sources coming in?
I think Jesus made himself known to her. Yeah.
Yeah, identified.
Right.
You got to remember that the whole reason for that is this message is for the West, because the East
Right.
already has this message. The
Right.
West needed this message.
Right.
So it comes in a Western
Right.
religious, you know,
Right.
it's just a symbol. Jesus
Right.
is just a symbol.
I mean, there are other entities out there.
Of course, yes, but he very specifically stated his name as Jesus to her.
In the entity would state his name is Jesus.
The proceeding, the dictation of the course was Helen had 3 months of dreams that Jesus featured fundamentally. And there was quite a bit of the communication between her and him about her private life. So she was kind of led into it.
Right.
And that's a very good description. There's a book that is called Absence from Felicity.
Yes, I happen
Really want to know this.
to, yeah, this is the book Herb's talking about, is Absence from Felicity, which goes through all the grueling aspects of Helen's life and what led her to being able to take down the course. Thanks, Herb. By the way, this is Herb Klinder. He is the fellow that was the teacher here when I first started, and much appreciation to Herb and his wife, Margaret. All right, so after a number of years, they realized that this was a spiritual document closely related to the teachings of the non-dualistic Vedanta of the Hindu religion with eternal truths in Christian terminology. And much like Rose was speaking before, I really feel this is much more Eastern philosophy put into the Christian context. All right, so Helen completed scribing the course in 1968, or so she thought. She had just completed the text. A couple of weeks later, the voice started up again, and she realized that these were going to be daily lessons, so she figured maybe this won't take nearly as long as the text did. 1968, she finished the text. Yep. All right, it took 21 months to dictate the workbook. When she was completed with that, she said a prayer in completion. And at that time, Bill suggested that they work on editing the course. Eventually, Helen began to hear the voice one more time, so the editing stopped, and this became the teacher's manual. After the completion of the course scribing, Helen felt the course was only for a handful of people. As we know, that wasn't correct. After scribing was completed, Bill Thetford showed the material to only 4 people. Hewlin Casey, who is the grandson, is that grandson?
Son.
Oh, the son, okay, I know that the grandson does some things too. The grandson of Edgar Casey, who I mentioned before, that did some channeling. So that he was from the president of the Association of Research and Enlightenment. He also showed it to a man named Father Michael, a Catholic priest who had been in one of Bill and Helen's classes, and then 2 personal friends, because they weren't too, at that point, they weren't too comfortable sharing with a lot of people. All right. The priest had a background including the study of religions and mysticism, which were in harmony with the great mystic teachings of the East. At the time of the course's completion, Bill accidentally came in contact with Dr. Kenneth Wapnick. Ken Wapnick was brought up as in a Jewish home and was educated for the first 8 years in Hebrew parochial school. By the age of 13, he left God and Judaism behind, determined never to think of religious issues again. Followed by a long period of agnosticism, which was coupled with a growing passion and love for classical music, especially Mozart and Beethoven were at the top of the list. And at that time, he did not associate the idea of music and spirituality together. This led him to deep intervals of experiences going within. And at this time, he did his doctoral dissertation on Saint Teresa of Avila, the famous 16th century Spanish mystic. A couple of years later, after the breakup of his first marriage, God showed up for Ken, and he began to feel a personal preference. He was drawn to, why don't I show Kenny here? Let's see, where's Kenny? Where's Kenny?
Ken Wapnick was married.
Oh, he was married twice before Gloria, both for a short time. Yes, the first one was for sure. Yeah. Okay. Correct. Sorry. All right. So at that point in time, he began to feel the presence, and he was drawn to visit a Trappist monastery, the Abbey of Gethsemane in Kentucky. He was surprised that he felt totally at home there. And while he was at the monastery, he felt that it was God's will that he become a Trappist monk, as well as a Roman Catholic, which he would have to become before he became a Trappist monk. Yes. I think it's a monk who is pretty secluded in silence. Yeah. Yeah. And I've been to the monastery of Gethsemane in Kentucky, and they do have, it's Catholic. They do have vespers and whatnot, but for the most part, the monks are very quiet. And he was really being drawn to that very quiet, still, connected experience. All right. All right, so though he had no interest in the church or Jesus, its central figure, he decided that he was going to become a Catholic. And he went to the chaplain where he worked, and the chaplain baptized him and confirmed him. And in preparation for entering the monastery, but church law decrees that he had to wait a whole year before he can become a Trappist monk after he became a Catholic. So he decided to leave, let's see, all right. So he decided to leave his job at Thanksgiving and spend the time quietly and alone, because again, he was being drawn inward. He felt he should spend part of his time in Israel, and so arranged to go a few days before the holidays. Shortly after his baptism, the chaplain who baptized him told him a priest in his religious order was anxious to meet him. This is when Ken met Father Michael, and if you remember, Father Michael was one of the 4 people that was aware of the course. Catholic?
Yeah.
Yeah. Father Michael was a psychologist and had done part of his graduate training under Bill and Helen. Helen, Bill, and Father Michael became very good friends. In fact, Father Michael was one of the few people that they not only told about the course when it was completed, they even told him about it before it was completed. So one day, Bill was reading an article in the highest state of consciousness, I don't know if it was a booklet or whatever it was, in which an article of Ken's appeared called Mysticism and Schizophrenia. Bill showed the article to Michael as an example of a psychologist who took the mystical experience seriously. When the chaplain mentioned to Michael that he had recently baptized a psychologist, a phenomenon he equated to the second coming, because that doesn't happen very often, Michael recognized his name and expressed an interest to meet Ken. They met and, quote, quickly became friends. Michael thought Ken should meet Helen and Bill. They met and quickly, shortly before Ken left for Israel, he did meet Helen and Bill. They spent a friendly evening just sharing about their lives. And at one point during the evening, someone mentioned the book that Helen had written, which had to do with spiritual development. Bill pointed to the corner where their 7 black pieces binders were. Ken did not feel inspired to look at the books. He was leaving soon. And at the end of the evening, Ken felt like he had just met 2 very holy people. He left for Israel a couple of days later. While in Israel, Ken spent time in 2 monasteries. He wrote to both Helen and Bill. And in the letter to Helen, he said he would like to read her book, and he capitalized the word "be." And he later was surprised that when she showed him his original letter that he had done that, because it wasn't done consciously. He felt very at home in the environment of a life in the monastic. Yeah.
So the thing that I'm trying to understand
Mhm.
is,
First of all, trying to understand is the problem, but go on. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, but in the course's setting, its
Mhm.
cosmology is so antithetical to Catholics and
Amen.
Christians. and
Yes.
Why are these people all of a sudden agreeing with it?
Well, again, it's not a thinking thing. I mean, I knew a Jesuit priest who taught the Course of Miracles. This was a number of years back. But if it speaks to your heart, it speaks to your heart. And that's not on the norm. In fact, Ken wrote a book with a Catholic priest, and the Catholic priest was very impressed with Ken. And they sat down and had an interview, of which they basically both said, this is what the Course is. The priest said, this is what Catholicism is. And they agreed to disagree, or agreed to agree that they were different.
Let me make it more clear.
Mhm.
So, since the course is antithetical to most religions, why isn't there a significant resistance to it? I mean,
I think there's a huge resistance to it.
well, I mean at the level of its inception, because
Mm.
the Gnostics, for example, early Christian Gnostics were killed. They were
Right, but
outright.
fortunately, we've gone beyond that. Fingers crossed, right? Yeah, yeah. And I'm sure, yeah,
Well,
of course, yeah,
personally,
right, right.
yeah.
And I would guess that many of us in this room were killed because of our spiritual beliefs at one time or another. And here we are again, because this truth has rise to the surface. Yeah, right. Well, I was too.
Somehow I got out of that because it wasn't working in the terms of not working for me, but not working even for themselves. It wasn't working the way they said it was supposed to work. And that's an internal confusion that they don't recognize. They just go past all that and make rules. So I think that's the whole thing, is that the rulemaking ended, said the summer of love. Yeah, the rulemaking people with spirituality, that they had, and the Beatles had transcendental meditation. So
Right.
it feels like it's like this, like just like getting information, going out of her mind, and the rest of us were going, where is it? Where is it? Where is it?
Right.
Andrea, I haven't seen not the same experience, but years ago, I drifted apart from Catholic Church before, and I looked. Not all the time, but occasionally. Never even heard of Course in Miracles. I heard about it from Marianne. I mean, so I don't think it's widely known at all.
Well, I think it's why it's like underneath there, like we don't know what the universe is giving us. We're asking, we're begging for what God, what am I supposed to do? How do I live? And when I walked in the door and met everybody, I said, oh,
I'm home. Yeah.
Just not with not with any kind of like telling everybody about it, because people don't, it's like you're in two different places. They don't want to know about it because it scares the hell out of them to think that the rules don't count for them.
Oh, there's no big backlash. Of course, nobody knows about it. I mean, it's like it's.
Okay, this
But-
is not true.
No,
I listened to, or I did until like the pandemic. I used to listen to Reverend again, his name is out in Solon, the Scottish guy with a huge church. I used to listen to Green Right Christian radio a lot.
that's you, but I'm talking about the general
Oh,
public.
I'm making a point. So they put out a booklet, Why the Course in Miracles is a Cult.
Mhm.
And I had heard about it, But then I saw the booklet. No, they pay attention, because they're always looking for new people, and the way they get new people sometimes is to tell you this is wrong.
Sure.
But no, it was a big deal, it's not a big deal now, but it was a big deal
Yep.
in the 90s and early 2000s. It was well known, and it worked.
And I think, Russ, the bottom line is you'll be drawn to it if it's right for you when it's time. And there's no, even people that come to the class, we know people come for a week or two and they're gone. Other people come and stay forever. If you're drawn to it, it's like a magnet. It's right for you.
I'm sure I never heard about, never talked about benefit, but that's all I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So what year, Russ, did you become aware of it?
I'm sorry.
What year did you become aware?
5, 6 years ago. Yeah, something like that. Yep. And you know how we found out? Because my email is Mary ACIM, and I always was wondering if anybody would ever ask me what that meant, and Russ did.
What the course is asking us to do is to look at our own resistance.
Sure, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Go, every single day, every single moment, am I choosing love? If
Right.
I'm not, there's my resistance.
Exactly.
Doesn't
And-
matter what's going on out there.
Right, right.
It really does put you below the radar, nobody's caring what you know, as long as my Jehovah's Witness friend, she loves me dearly, we don't talk about religion, but we know God. We feel God, we talk about God, we talk about where do you go, who do you know.
Right.
And that's part of all the separation of trying to separate out God into all those different kinds of religions or branches of it. And when you stop doing that and you come here, then, when you come to when I came here, I stopped doing that.
Right.
If you look at the Bible, for example, Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is within.
Yes, he did.
The course is saying the kingdom of heaven is
Absolutely.
within.
But the Bible says a whole lot of other things that don't align with that. Yes.
But there's been such a focus on distorting that message, to say, well, God is out there. He's not inside of you. He's outside of you.
But again, Ken would say, on the chart that I normally have, there's a line down the middle. And when he did it on a chalkboard, he would go and erase part of that line because we're trying to mesh the two thought systems together. And he said, people are going to do this with the course as well. They're different. They're mutually exclusive thought systems. And if we try to do this to them, we're going to lose the value of what is intended. And, again, the church, people that do that, whatever, aren't doing it because they're bad people. They're doing it because they're afraid of the love of God. So that's kind of how that gets played out. Just like me. Yes. Yep.
Got an email in my box, in my Gmail, and the mysticism is coming back
Sure.
into Christianity. So when I say Catholic, I grew up Catholic. When I say Catholic, I'm talking about how I grew up. There's a
Sure.
whole
Oh, yeah, sure.
Catholicism.
Right.
Mysticism
Sure.
now. So, it comes back.
Yep. And again, what are we drawn to? Ken would always say that the course is, and the course says it, this is not the only path. There's lots and lots of paths. Find the one that works for you, but find out what it means once if you're going to do it. So, all right. So anyways, when Ken finally did come home, he really felt that his plan was going to be a monastic life. And he decided that he would have that that would be his life going forward. But before nestling in, he thought he should come back to the US, visit his family, and stop in and see Helen and Bill and find out what that book was about. And as the story goes, Ken walked in and without even saying hello to Helen, he said, "Where's that book?" Because while he was gone, he had a number of dreams about the course, so he knew there was something going on in regard to that. So Helen and Bill took Ken to their office, unlocked a cabinet, and presented to him 2 sections from the manuscript, one being "Choose Once Again," and the other "For They Have Come." He immediately recognized the profound spiritual message. He found it to be the most perfect blend of psychology and spirituality he had ever read. It wasn't long before Ken realized that this was to be his life's work. He loved and respected Helen and Bill's dedication to the course. So shortly after that, mid-73, he began to go to the medical center every day, where he carefully read and reread each section, and then he discussed it with Helen as to how to properly edit the course. It was now a self-study course that was easy to read and consistent in style. And it had to be quite an experience because Helen wasn't all that excited about going through the editing process. And oftentimes he would say, okay, I don't care how you want this to be written, but let's keep it consistent. So he would say, all right, what are the rules you want to put forth? Let's keep it consistent throughout the course. Which again, we kind of had to twist her arm to keep that going. In this process, did you somebody have a, oh no, okay. In this process, Helen and Ken formed a deep and profound bond as they worked to edit the course together. They spent endless, painstaking hours going through the course word by word to be sure that it represented Jesus' message with clarity.
Did Jesus speak like Shakespearean, or was that?
Yes, that's how it came through. But Ken explained that as the reason why it came through that way was because Helen was into that kind of, to Shakespeare. So probably if it had come through you, and I don't know if any of you are familiar with Gary Renard's books, what is it called? Yes, I mean, obviously that came through very different than the course did. Yeah, so it would have come through.
Like, it wasn't like she just wrote down.
She just wrote, and they edited it, made sure the sentences flowed properly. They put titles on the chapters and divided it up and whatnot like that. No. That was. Oh yeah, and he would make opinions and suggestions as they went along. Yeah. And then they removed some of the personal information that was specifically for Helen and Bill. Because while she was taking it down, it was like she was responsible for the scribing of it. But again, she not only was Bill holding her hand, I guess you could say that Jesus was holding her hand as well, because, this was so bizarre for her. And oftentimes she would just resist it. Sometimes she would even just say, okay, I'm not doing this anymore. And for a couple of days, she wouldn't sit down and do it. And Jesus would sort of keep nudging her, and she wouldn't be able to sleep very well, or however it happened. And after a few days, she'd say, all right, I'll do it. And so it went. All righty. And again, throughout this process, they wanted to make sure the course, word by word, to be sure the course represented Jesus' message with clarity. Ken would comfort and console Helen, pray with her, and even take her shopping frequently, like almost every single week. He was like a son to her, and their deep connection lasted throughout their lives. And in regard to the shopping, a lot of times she would go shopping, and the next week she would go returning. And on some level, Helen was very aware that that was her form of resistance, because she wasn't ready to have that experience to that degree. And I'll talk more about some of that later. Okay, in 1978, Helen Schuckman scribed a personal message of guidance for the Foundation for Inner Peace that came from Jesus. In the message, the goal was given that a foundation was to be established, and not only should the Course in Miracles be published, that it should also be taught. Ken Wapnick was designated as the group member who would be primarily involved with teaching the course's message. So in May of 1975, Bill and Helen met a woman named Judith Skutch. There's Judith. And I lovingly called Judith the fourth leg to the table, because there was Helen and Bill, Ken, and then, Judith was the one who was going to bring this together and make sure that it was published and whatnot. She was involved in research and investigation of paranormal phenomena. She had a big circle of friends interested in New Age material and spirituality. She was very involved and passionate with her research. And she had a good family, plenty of money, a beautiful home. And one day, shortly before she met Judith, she felt like she was being split apart. She began to weep. She let out a despair, wrenching cry, "Won't somebody up there please help me?" The words took her back even, for she had never used them before or even had the thought of it before. When Judith met Helen and Bill, after some small talk, Judith felt like Helen was trying to hide something from her and that she wasn't revealing. So during dessert, Judith turned to Helen and said, "You hear inner voices, don't you?" Of which Helen paled, and Judy felt apologetic and embarrassed for what she had spontaneously said. Bill pulled his chair out and invited Judy to come to his office, where they met Ken Wapnick. Bill shut and locked the door and asked Judy to keep what they were about to share confidential. Bill and Helen proceeded to share the story of what had taken place in the last 10 years. Judy was not stunned by this conversation because, again, she was into a lot of psychic, spiritual things. And she felt that this was like her real family, and that it was very natural. And much like what Andrea was saying, when she found the course, there was an experience of, yeah, I'm home. This is my family. Bill then unlocked his filing cabinet and shared the 1,500-page document with Judy. After reading the first passage, a great sigh of relief welled up inside of her, and she thankfully said, "Finally, here's my map home." And she knew this was the answer to her call for help, to the deep-seated problem she was experiencing and which had made her so depressed. She, Bill, Ken, and Helen became very close and eventually formed the Foundation for Inner Peace as a nonprofit organization. Eventually, they were directed to publish the course. They started by approaching conventional publishing houses, but they realized that wasn't the way it was going to be, because most of the publishing companies wanted to change the words in the course, and they knew that wasn't something they wanted to do. So they concluded that the publishing of the course had to be within a certain criteria. Number one, no words were to be changed. They were to remain intact, nonprofit, and it was to be stewarded only by those who were devoted to the course and its care. Eventually, the course was published by the Foundation of Inner Peace under the above criteria. So they wanted to make sure that there wasn't any changes made to the course, which again, regular publishing would do. All right, so just a little bit of trivia to lighten the day. Here are some famous people who studied the course. The originator of Whole Foods, John Mackey, Oprah, John Denver, and even his hairdresser. And John even wrote a song about the course, which if you dig hard enough, you can find it online, because I did. Richard Thomas, an actor, Denzel Washington, had spoken about a spiritual experience that was influenced by the course, which led him to become an actor. Cher, her lyrics from the song "If I Could Turn Back Time" were inspired by the course. Beyonce quoted in one of her songs, "Nothing real can be threatened," in the song All Night, which I'm not familiar with. And then Shirley MacLaine, who had had many psychic experiences as well, felt she was positively impacted by the course. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the translations of the course, because the course has now been translated into a number of different languages. Initially, Helen was very much against the translation of the course because of her concern of the loss of continuity, essence, and understanding. She basically said, "Over my dead body." And I personally don't remember much about my French class in high school, but I do remember the sentence construction and whatnot was very different from English. And personally, I have no idea how anyone could take this course with the word usage and so on and be able to translate it into other languages. But somehow, with the guidance of Jesus, it did take place. Oh, I'll talk about that in a moment. All right. Yeah. And when Helen came close to her passing, someone said to her, "Why are you leaving?" And she responded, "It's time for me to get out of its way." And Helen oftentimes referred to Jesus as it. It was kind of a way she could, yeah, who could it be now, right? So shortly after she passed away, the foundation was guided to begin the translations of the course. And as I understand that some Spanish-speaking people actually tried to attempt to translate the course even before the official translation, because there were so many Spanish-speaking people that wanted the course in Spanish. So a little bit about the translation process. As I understand, when somebody was willing to or felt drawn to translate the course into a different language, they would go through a very extensive interview with Ken. He wanted to be sure that the translators were knowledgeable and fully understood the workings of the course. Not necessarily that they were living it 24 hours a day, but by having a deep understanding of what was before they could translate. And I understand that he went through certain sections of the course specifically to make sure that they had a very rich understanding of what that meant. All right. I recently heard in an interview about a Peruvian translator, and this again will show how we're still so attached to being egos. He said, when I was translating it, at times I would think, "Oh my gosh, what am I doing here? I'm not worthy of this job." And then other times he would think, "Wow, look at me, how special." So it really doesn't matter if we're gloating over how wonderful we are or we're feeling that we're unworthy. Both of these are different sides of the concept of our ego playing games with us. All right, so when the translators had difficulties, Ken would remind them that the real work goes beyond words. He encouraged them to go deeper beyond the words. It is a spiritual path. Go to the stillness, feel the love beyond the words. At this time, the course has been translated into 28 languages and more are being added. And some of the translations can cost up to $1 million to translate, and they're always being revised. Yeah.
$1 million for the translator?
Well, no, I don't think the translator gets all, I mean, I'm sure they get paid, but just the constant revisions and whatnot to bring it to fruition. And then, of course, the cost of publishing and whatnot as well, I'm sure. And again, with the translations, they were to be published in the same criteria of no words were to be changed. They would remain intact. It was to be non-profit, as well as stewarded by those who were devoted to the course. And of all the many times that I was at the foundation, many times there were translators from different countries that were there that stayed extended periods of time so that they could work very closely with Ken as they were working on the translations. So what time do we have? All right, maybe I'll talk about Bill and then we'll take a break. Yeah, sure, absolutely.
In Germany,
Hmm.
there doesn't exist a direct translation of the word mind. It's used as spirit,
Hmm.
it means Geist. Geist is spirit, but they also use it as mind. So this is a tremendous difficulty
Hmm.
if you consider how often the course uses the term mind.
Absolutely.
Not have a direct translation, but have to use, some stipulations in order to convey what the English is saying.
Like I said, it's mind-boggling to me that they even attempt to do it because right, he doesn't like it. But I know other people that have, their their mother language and they prefer that, so, yeah. But what a job.
Body. Between mind and body, what they call it Geist. And
Okay,
and
wow.
body. Yeah, I know what body is.
What's interesting is that you know how clearly.
Right, yes.
Many people really don't know how many people millions of record books in here, but I suspect since they don't have English, it's singing the drums.
Right.
Are they getting something out of it?
Oh, I'm sure they are. I'm sure. Again, if they're drawn to it, then that would be their way.
That's a different way of thinking. There's much more black and white.
Right, yeah.
In America, we are used to be a large gray, and
Hmm.
you see this very much when I see old movies.
Hmm.
In German movies, always the hero is totally perfect, and the evil person is totally evil.
Right, yes, right.
It's good and bad and
Right, exactly. Yeah. All right, so this is a picture of Bill Thetford. Is he gonna stay? All right, so a little bit about Bill. He was the co-scribe of the Course in Miracles with Helen Schuckman. Helen would say that without Bill, she could never have been able to bring the Course forth. And that was a quote from Never Forget to Laugh, which I'll show you later. As most of us, Bill had a childhood with many difficulties, and I'm going to share a little bit about some of the other main characters. And I think it's interesting that we sometimes might think, oh, there's that spiritual person. They never had anything horrible happen in their life. And yet they were drawn to the Course just as we were drawn to the Course, probably because of the difficulties they may have had in their childhood or in their lives. So as most of us, Bill had a childhood with many difficulties. When he was 7 years old, his beloved older sister passed away very suddenly when he was young. Shortly after that, he was bedridden for about 2.5 years from scarlet fever. He had to literally learn how to walk again. He was from a lower middle class family who believed that hard physical labor was necessary for survival. Due to Bill's illness, his father was very concerned that he would end up as a welfare case. His parents hardly appreciated his academic pursuits. They thought a PhD was a worthless piece of paper that hung on the wall. Unless you had physical manual work, that nothing else counted. And this was certainly, as I often say, a classroom below the belt. And as most of us, we take our hurts and our disappointments and they become internalized, and we carry them forward for decades and decades, creating a basis for later conflicts and frustrations. And Bill was gay, and he had a lot of guilt around that as well. All right. Yes.
After his sister died.
Mhm.
his parents
Yes,
left
I'm gonna, yeah,
him.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah. His father told him it should have been you that died.
Can you imagine him mad?
Yeah.
Small, but not.
Yeah.
You know, with the death of your sister, now knowing your parents wished it was you.
And you know, who knows if his parents really said that, or if they said it in the way that he took it, just like many of us, we hear a little bit of a story and we take it in because that's our ego kind of holding on to that and making that something I can hold on to, that I can say I'm an innocent victim.
Internalize things as well. I think
Sure.
it's really neat to see your family. I guess I went through that somewhat with my sister.
Sure, of course.
It did me instead of her, what she's going through.
Mhm.
It just is the kind of way that you want to feel. You think if you say that, or somehow you take that in, that that's going to resolve the issue that you're having, which is that you have no control over
Right.
what's going on.
And it's ultimately so much easier to point a finger at somebody else than to take it within and find out what wounds I'm carrying that are keeping me from knowing who I am.
To escape from how the world might, to escape from them, seeing it that way, wishing it wasn't them.
Yep.
It's just how you're going to try to manipulate spirit in that way, that you think if you do that, and that's a lot from, I guess, the rules, following the rules and thinking that the rules could be changed for my sense of well-being instead
Right.
of what's going to happen.
Right. And Ken would often say our parents were our very first special relationship. And what do we do to special relationships? We project our guilt, sin, and fear on them. And so that works out really well, because there isn't a single parent, including me being a parent, that would ever be able to be a perfect parent and provide your child with everything they think they need to be okay. It's, again, part of the setup of this world.
Do it on their regards, because you don't want anything to happen to them.
Sure.
You actually calling out that picture about how things can happen, which is very depressing and also not true.
Right. So as good little egos, we bring all past associations with us when we observe anything, whether it be a person, an object, or a situation. We are asked in the course to practice viewing everything with new eyes, allowing ourselves to see without the usual interpretations, judgments, biases, and ever-present questions. How can I use this for my benefit is what the ego is always asking about. It promises a sense of well-being and peace when we view anything without our history laid on it, the obstacles of accumulated thought. And as we know, this world simply is not satisfying, no matter how much we may be getting away with. We are always seeking out there rather than through means of coming within and asking for peace. Okay, so just a little bit more about Helen and Bill and their relationship. You would think with Helen and Bill, since they work so closely together in scribing the course, that it would be this wonderful, loving relationship. And fortunately, while they were working on the course, they were able to maintain their differences. But once they were out in the world, that went out the window. And even though when they first started scribing the course, they did work on it. Eventually, especially Helen just kind of cast it aside, said, "Oh, we've had enough of this. We're not going to do this," and went on her merry way. And I'll speak a little bit about Bill in a few minutes. He took it to heart later in life and really started to work on it. So okay, let's see. But the reason why they, as well as all of us, see people outside of us as a conflict is because we're projecting the conflict on that other person. So we see exactly what we're projecting out there. And that's kind of how this whole process works. They were very different. Helen was overly aggressive and Bill was a passive aggressive. And no matter how they played the game, they would find ways to hate each other. Bill blamed Helen for problems in the relationships. He thought the relationship was not healed because Helen wouldn't change her mind. He was always blaming her and feeling that if only Helen would change, he would be healed. And how many of us play that game, right? You change and I'll be okay.
Out of the four, did anyone have a romantic relationship with each other?
Well, Helen kind of had the hots for Bill, even though he was much older, she was much older than he was. But I think it was just a game they played that never went anywhere. But there was a little something going on there, and I mean, he was gay on top of it. Yeah, and she knew he was gay. Yes.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, yeah. She had all kinds of games she played. Yeah.
Said that he was non-practicing.
Yeah, I mean, right. There was, yeah, exactly. But again, they worked on the process of bringing the course in, but then that was it. So later on in his life, Bill had some more fun. Again, I mentioned that his parents were not impressed with what he did and that he was a psychotherapist and, had an office. So at one point, his father broke into his office and destroyed it. And you can imagine as an adult having your own parent destroy your office. And Ken went on to say, but we have to really look at this because what do we do when something happens in our lives? We keep repeating it and carrying it on and carrying it around and carrying it on. And Ken said, tried to point out to him that many times that Bill repeated the stories. Why would he be giving that much power to something that happened? Yes, it happened. It happened in an instant and it was over. But he chose to keep carrying it with us. And again, which many of us do as well. But we do, and we believe we are justified. What do I want to be true? And I don't know who said it earlier, but this idea of if I want peace more than anything else, I can't carry the ruins of yesterday with me and have an open space for an answer to come forth that's different. Now, that doesn't mean you don't look at the wounds as they come up. You want to become aware, oh, there it is again. And that's an opportunity for you to ask for healing. But if you just let it come up and you keep dancing around in the process, it's probably not going to make a difference. All right. By reacting self-destructively, you are giving them approval for their misperceptions. And I think that's quite a valuable quote because the individual that's doing that to you is misperceiving because they're looking through the lens of the ego as well. But we're the only ones who can do something different with that. Do I want to carry it with me and keep dragging it around, or do I want to have that as an opportunity for healing? All right, and our ultimate goal and purpose of the resurrection was to demonstrate that no amount of misperceptions has any influence at all on the Son of God if you know you are the Son of God. And that's why Jesus in the Course could be hung on the cross, called names, spit on, you name it, and be crucified. And he only looked out at the audience, smiled, and was able to love because he was fully engaged in his mind with the belief of truth and his right mind. All right. So Bill, like all of us, must ask honestly whether he is willing to demonstrate that his parents, anything in the world, have hurt me. Unless he's willing to do this, he has not forgiven them. All right, so Bill had Bill had some very difficult lessons to deal with. Helen, his parents, the fact that he was gay. So he decided near the end of his life that he was going to work on his relationships. And I think this is a really sweet story. A coworker of his did not know anything about the course and that he and Helen were writing it. But this fellow did not like Helen and he wanted Bill to let her go. And of course, Bill refused and the man eventually stopped talking to him. Bill decided that every morning he would go into the man's office. He knew what time he came in, and Bill would just sit there and read the newspaper, not say a word. This went on for a month with no response from this friend. About a month into, Bill said hi, and Art just grunted. One day, Bill could not come at the regular time, and Art asked where he was. And Bill explained that he had to go to a meeting. From then on, they began to talk. Not long after that, they were in an overbooked convention, and people at the convention were asked to double up in the rooms. And Art asked Bill if he would be his roommate. Bill knew that this relationship was healed. So again, if you're in the confrontation, can't heal, can't heal, can't heal. Bill was at the place of, I'm going to work through these relationships and I'm going to find out how we do this. Exactly.
So he didn't do anything, but.
Yeah, he didn't fight it, right?
Asking how he is, and then he was giving them information.
Yes, yeah.
May I add some?
Sure. Uh-huh.
To that story?
Mhm.
The Bill had, his involvement in spirituality.
Quiet,
secret.
right?
And
Hmm.
when they were at the convention, the other fellow, what was his name?
Where did it go? Art.
They were sitting at the bar,
Mhm.
and because they had to wait, and they had a deal or something like this.
Right.
And instead of normally the peanuts that you did with peanuts, there was a dish with ornaments,
Mm.
which was a miracle in itself.
Mm.
And Art says to Bill, take 3 ornaments.
Oh, right.
Edgar Casey told me, and Bill said, who told you? And at that moment, he realized that Art knew about Edgar Casey.
Yeah, right.
And he realized in himself, he felt it's over.
Mm.
You know, this
Okay.
relationship was here.
Right.
Because Bill had
A connection, right?
With Casey,
Right.
Casey, who was the son of Edgar Casey, who was at the time the leader of the Association for Research and Development, which is short for ARE.
Mhm. Yeah.
And by the
Yep.
way, it was at the headquarters of the ARE in 1982 that I found the course in mind.
Right. Yep. Yeah.
There always was a connection
Mhm.
between the course and the ARE.
Right. And at one point in time, I think it was shortly after Helen started scribing the course and was still at a very uncomfortable state, Bill actually took her to ARE so that he could, oh, really? Okay, I didn't know that. So that she could at least have the experience of talking with people that had had somewhat similar experiences. So,
Because of this.
right. Yep.
Okay.
What's that? Oh, absolutely. Yes, 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 yes. So at one point in time, and this was on 4th of July, Bill Thetford was visiting with Judith Skutch for a party. And Judith noticed that Bill was more playful, more forthcoming, and less formal than usual. It was a day before the 4th of July, and Judith was planning. She was startled to see Bill dancing a little jig in their living room, explaining, I am free, I am finally free, I am flexible. At first, Judith thought maybe he was having a kind of a manic episode. And Judith asked him what he meant. And he looked her in the eyes and he put his hand over her shoulders and said, I am not holding any grievances. Judith said, oh, come on. And then asked him about several problematic people in his past. He had specific answers for everyone that he'd written to so-and-so and gone to meet someone else and extend his forgiveness to everyone. Then she said, what about Helen? And he said, how could I not forgive Helen. She was the opportunity for me to learn forgiveness. And Judith knew he was being serious. And, I think sometimes we think those delightful relationships in our lives that are the most irritating and upsetting are the ones you want to, toss out the window in a fast moving truck or something. And yet those can be the relationships that can bring us healing if we choose to use them. And I think it's in the teacher's manual, maybe one of the workbook lessons, I'm not sure. There's a section where it talks about different levels of connecting with people. And one is being in an elevator and a little child is crying and you comfort them. And another level is people you knew through school and then you part your ways. And then the last paragraph talks about having relationships that can be the most difficult relationships that you could possibly imagine. And yet those are opportunities, if you use the course for healing, that can make the most progress. So the next morning, Judith asked Bill if he still felt jubilant. And he said, sure, it's Freedom Day. It's my Freedom Day. And she said, well, I'm glad it's still working because I was a little suspicious of all this. When she asked him if he wanted to come along with her to the grocery store, Bill said he could walk and catch up with her. I must have made a face, Judith recalls. I guess he could see that I was worried about him having to wait for him because he said, don't worry, I'm not there. And if I'm not there in time, go home without me. A chill went through Judith and she put her arms around him and said, I'll never go home without you. He just patted me on the head and smiled and off he went. Judith then gathered her things for the store. And as she was driving her car down the road a short distance, she saw Bill had collapsed from a heart attack. And Bill passed away on the 4th of July and he was free. So with that, we're going to take a break because some lovely people brought lots of yummy good things to eat. So we're not there yet. You have to stay. So just before the break, we had a question if we were going to talk about Helen, and of course that person walked out of the room. So I guess we'll wait a few more minutes until she comes back because that wouldn't be fair. Not going to get started any sooner, whether I like it or not. Coming? Yes, we're going to speak about Helen now. I think I'll start because she'll just have to miss out. All right, so Helen Schuckman did not have a strong religious background. Her parents were non-observant Jews, but she was always drawn to forms of spirituality. Her parents were rather distant. She had an older brother, but they weren't very close. And the way the apartment they lived in was set up, she and her German governess were kind of like on one end and the rest of the family was on the other side. So she really didn't have a lot of association with her family. And basically her governess, took care of her and helped with her upbringing. So she would sometimes take Helen to the Catholic Church, and Helen was always very drawn to churches. And because at that time, if you weren't Catholic, you could not go into the church. I think that's changed by now, but at that time you wouldn't. So she would kind of be in the back and watch, and she was always very fascinated with that. At one point in time, Helen had somewhat of a spiritual experience, and she decided she should be baptized as a Baptist. She resented her Jewish roots and spent most of her adult years as a spiritual seeker, being involved in many different expressions of Christianity. She loved visiting churches. And as a child, Helen felt she was ugly and she was very insecure, as many of us were. So later in her life, she considered herself an atheist. And I know a lot of times people will say, well, Helen was an atheist. And to me, it was like, I think she just never resolved what was the answer. And so she gave up looking. She had a Bachelor of Arts degree. And while attending college, she met and married her husband, Lewis. She eventually worked with him at his bookstore, which she did not find very fulfilling. So in her early 40s, she returned to New York University to study psychology. She received a Master of Arts, followed by a PhD in 1957. And as she went out to find the job, she came, and I mentioned that she founded, the job that she so desperately wanted. And Jesus said, nope, not getting that one. And that's how she ended up meeting Bill. They never got along. Bill tended to be quiet, soft-spoken, and Helen was assertive and could be very abrasive. And again, that's not the image you would think of a person that Jesus would choose to be the one that would scribe the course. But that's the way it was. He was very tall and thin, and she was a little tiny thing. Ken described their relationship as a professional battlefield, a war in which they were both very active, if not eager, participants. They would argue throughout the day, and then they would often go home at night and call each other and argue some more. Helen would even accuse Bill of things that happened before they knew each other. So and let me just tell you a quick story from Absence from Felicity, where Helen had a vision or a dream that she and Bill were in a lifetime together, and she was like the princess or priestess or whatever of the community. And at one point in time that Bill had taken the jewel out of her headdress. And then they found that he was the one that did it. And because she was the priestess, it was her job to pierce him in the heart and kill him, of which he couldn't do. And so the next scene, she's walking in the desert, completely stripped of all her princessness or whatever. And she obviously walked to her death. So even before they met each other, they had a history, even though they didn't have a logical explanation as to what was going on. All right. Though Jesus once said to Helen, this course is not meant to be a higher shopping service. And I think that's something to really think about, because this is not a course and give me that new car. I want that special person. I want this. Give me that, whatnot, like that. Jesus told her. Yes. Because the only shopping we're to be doing is the shopping for peace of mind, not of things in the world. But with Helen, he was a little bit more lenient, because I think in order for her to be appeased in this process, she needed a little bit more motivation. So he would, at one time, told her where to find green pantyhose in the days when we silly girls used to wear green pantyhose. And one day he mentioned to her, she was looking for a coat, and she was, of course, looking for the rack of her size. And the voice told her to go to a rack with coats that were a couple sizes bigger. And she, resisted, like most of us. We think we want to hear a voice, and when we hear it, then we debate it. But she eventually did, and she was introduced to a man that had a special needs child, of which she was very proficient at, so she was able to help him. And again, I mentioned earlier that Helen and Ken went shopping consistently, a lot, all the time. She did not like buses. She liked taxis, is when she could get away with it. But one of the things that was kind of cool was, after years of shopping with Helen, one day he came to pick her up, and he said, I don't have to do this anymore. Which didn't mean she never, ever went shopping, but that compulsive shopping where she had to fill that space because of her fear had just gone down, and she no longer had to do it that way. So again, even as an adult, she was belittled, and I mentioned the family gathering where, or did I say that? Maybe I didn't. At a family gathering, a cousin who knew she was a therapist asked for help, and they went off into another room. She helped the person, and as she was walking out, her father said to her, "Why would anybody ask you a question of anything of importance?" So again, I think the beauty of the characters that were chosen to bring this forth were no different than we were, or we are. You know, they had problems, they had issues, they had, you know, I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, you name it. That's how this game gets played. So as I mentioned before, Helen often was challenged by what Jesus would share and would sometimes change it only to have Jesus correct it a few days later. One evening, while Helen was taking down her notes, in which is now chapter 16, in a section called The End of Illusions, she was particularly disturbed. And again, this was after she'd been doing this for a while, so she had settled into it a little bit more. But this day, the voice said, "Just write it as it occurs to you. You will recognize it later." She wrote until the section was finished, and then she called Bill and said, "It's happened. It's gone haywire. It doesn't make sense at all." To which Bill responded, "I doubt it." He had been through this many times with Helen. He told Helen, "As long as you're so upset about it, try to forget about it now, and we'll go over it first thing in the morning." And this is, again, a good example of how Bill was there to support Helen, encourage her, and to help her walk through this process. The next morning, she came in sure disaster, and she read the notes to Bill, becoming more and more anxious as they got close to that section. She paused an instant and then burst into tears. The voice had been right. He did recognize it. It was a version of the Lord's Prayer. And it took her some time before she could get her composure to go back to work. And this is the prayer we recite at the beginning of our classes. Forgive us our illusions, Father, and help us to accept our true relationship with you, in which there are no illusions and where none can ever enter. Our holiness is yours. What can there be in us that needs forgiveness when yours is perfect? The sleep of forgetfulness is only the unwillingness to remember your forgiveness and your love. Let us not wander into temptation, for the temptation of the Son of God is not your will. And let us receive only what you have given and accept but this into the minds you created and which you love. Amen. So one of the things Ken would often refer to in relationship to the Course was that the Course came to, I guess, revamp the mistakes that were made in Christianity and really present what Jesus meant back then, where the egos that took that information weren't able to do at that time. Yep.
Did we solve that everything?
No, Helen, when she went home at night, after she had her dinner, the voice would come and give her the information. She would then go to bed, get up in the morning, and before work, they would meet, Bill and Helen would meet, and they would go through him typing it and her reading it. So I thought this definition of the voice was rather sweet. Here is a definition of Helen's experience hearing Jesus' voice as a form of inner dictation that was not a literal sound, but rather a clear seeing of words in her mind. Like hearing with her ears, but more like a mental recognition of a very rapid internal stream of thought, so clear that she could ask for a phrase to be repeated if she missed it. She was always in a fully conscious state. The voice was distinct from her own. It was a form of knowing, which I thought was an interesting word that she used, because the Course talks about knowing as not knowledge, but knowing who you are. And Helen could stop the voice at any time and go eat dinner or whatever and come back a while later, and it wouldn't miss a beat. Though it was a very interesting process, it would be a process that would be extremely challenging for Helen. And when she finally completed the dictation, she heard Jesus say, "This time you did it," because apparently she had played that part before. All right, make sure I got what I'm looking for here. Okay. So that was about Helen. As you asked. So there have been many teachers of the Course in Miracles throughout the years. Marianne Williamson is certainly one many of us have heard and probably read her book, Return to Love. Jerry Jampolsky did a lot of attitudinal healing based on concepts of the Course. There was Hugh Prather, Tara Singh, David Hoffmeister, Eckhart Tolle speaks of the Course frequently, Robert Perry, Tony Ponticello, I think that's his name. And of course, Ken Wapnick, the one that I'm near and dear to. And for myself, I had studied and taught metaphysics for many years before I found the Course. I read every spiritual book I could get my hands on, listened to tapes, went to seminars, you name it, I would go to it. And in the process of that, I would, every once in a while, towards the end of that process, I would start to read books that referred to the Course in Miracles. And I thought, maybe it's time for me to go get that book. And because I didn't have a lot of money, I went to the library hoping that they would have it, and they did. And I began to read it. And as I began to read it, I absolutely didn't have a clue what it was saying. But every once in a while, some line would just, my heart just swelled and my eyes would tear, and I just knew this was my book. And I remember it was November, and my daughter said, "Mom, do you want me to buy you that book for Christmas?" And I said, "Nope, I can't wait that long. I need this book now." And a couple months later, I was looking through the bulletin, looking for someone who was going to be speaking here at Unity. And I happened to open up the bulletin, and it said Course in Miracles, 3 to 5 on Saturday, 7 a.m. on Sunday. And, and I thought to myself, what stupid times, why would anybody get up at 7 a.m. on Sunday morning or go to a class at 3 to 5 in the afternoon? I closed the bulletin and I said to my daughter, "I'm going to this class tomorrow. Do you want to come with me?" Of which he did. And I've been coming ever since. So go figure. What do I know about what my life is supposed to look like? The time zone, right. And that was in 1990. Herb and Margaret organized a group of people, anybody who wanted to go to the Foundation for A Course in Miracles, where Ken teaches or taught. So he was real cute. He had a big bulletin board, and we figured out who was going in whose car and whatever. And I don't know, it must have been close to 20 of us. It was a good sized group. All went to New York, to Roscoe, to experience Ken Wapnick. And from that point on, I just somehow knew this guy was for me. And certainly I didn't always know what the heck he was talking about. I didn't always agree with it. I didn't, I kicked and fought just like everybody in this room that says, "But wait a minute, what about this?" I went through that same process, but somehow it just rang true in my heart. So I just kept going back as often as I could. And every 4 months, I believe it was, he would send out a Lighthouse, which was their magazine, and he and sometimes his wife and he would write a nice article at the beginning, and then there were a list of all the classes that were available. And I would get to my calendar and find out the best time I could go to the classes, and I would keep going. And sometimes I would go, and I felt like I would integrate most of the things he said, and just when I kind of felt like I got it, then I'd go back and he'd knock me in the knees and I'd fall down in my face again. But it kept on going that way. And I continued to go to his classes until he passed away. And before he passed away, though, they did move to the foundation in Temecula, California, where I also went a number of times. And then I even went once after he passed away. So I'd just like to share a little bit about some of my experiences with Ken. Sure, absolutely.
These other people that you mentioned, who, written about A Course in Miracles,
Mhm.
still Ken was the first teacher, so they became supporting teachers of it, or wrote books about it, but really they were getting their information not just from the Course in Miracles book. Would you say they were also had listened to Ken?
Not necessarily. In fact, some of them are very opposed to the information that Ken puts forth. Some of them did, yes, but not all of them. Mary Ann Williamson, I don't think she even knew who Ken Wapnick was. Yeah. They just took their information and rode with it according to them.
Michael Burdett did follow.
Right, and some of the class, right.
Michael Burdett.
Okay, so we'll put Ken back up. Is that Ken?
No.
Okay. Is there, okay. All right, got to be talking about the right thing. So my experience of Ken was that he was a very humble man. He was not flashy. He was not arrogant. He had a very dry sense of humor. And anyone who ever met him would attest to that. He was playful and a bit of a jokester. Somebody would walk in and he had a personal relationship with them, maybe sometimes the people who translated, and he would do some joke when they walked in the door or whatever. And I always admired him because he was not a polished speaker, and he actually had a very significant stutter, which I think was kind of cute because we'd listen to the tapes and I think it's going away, but I don't know if it really went away or we got used to it. But the content of his words were impeccable. He never wavered from the purity of the message. He could pack more content in one sentence than anyone I have ever heard speak in my entire life. Occasionally, he would wear a tie only because his wife made him, but normally he just wore a pair of casual slacks and a short sleeve shirt and got up in front and started talking. He wasn't there to impress us. He seldom ever spoke of himself. Occasionally, if there was a story that was applicable to what was being taught at that time, he would share a little personal information, but his whole focus was on teaching the course to the highest degree that he knew how to do. He was asked a number of times to write his autobiography, and his response was always, "Why? I'm not important." He knew the message of love behind the words of the course was all that was held of value. But having said that, there is a book called A Symphony of Love, which is a compilation of a couple of autobiographies of his, plus a lot of other information if you want to check out more about Ken. And I forgot to mention, there's also a book about Bill Thetford called Never Forget to Laugh that really goes into great detail as to his history and his progression in the course. All right, so Ken facilitated workshops for over 30, wrote close to probably 50 books. I don't know, maybe not quite that many, and certainly numerous tapes and CDs of his classes, of which many of them are still being transcribed and made into CDs or Blu-rays or whatever they call them these days. All right, so there is no death because the Son of God is like his Father. Nothing you can do can change eternal life. Forget your dreams of sin and guilt and come with me instead to share the resurrection of God's Son. And I remember having contact with people that were at the foundation near the end of his life, and he kept saying, I'm not going to die. And they all thought that meant he wasn't physically going to die. But what he was saying is, how can I die? I'm not here. Yeah, well, of course. Yep. Yeah. All right. Let's see where we want to go next. So I have a couple stories I'd like to share about experiences when I was there. Ken was very approachable. You could asked to have your picture taken with him, which I did almost every time I went there. He was, "Oh, sure, come on over here, we'll do it." And he would always answer questions, even if they were the same questions that were asked over and over thousands of times throughout the work, all the workshops that he did, and he would smile patiently and answer them. Next. So one time there was a gal that came with a couple of us whose name was Phyllis. She was an elderly woman. She walked with a little cane. And this Shar, who comes here sometimes on Saturdays, and I came with her, and Shar especially would just talk about Ken, oh, Ken this, Ken that. And Phyllis would go, oh, he just can't be all that wonderful, can he? And so she eventually did come with us one time. And she sat right in the front of him. And literally, you would be as close as I am to Ginny. He would be standing up on just this little step on the stage, and you were right there with him. And she had a question halfway through the class, rose her hand. And he said, well, do you mind if I answer that question a little later? Because I'm in the middle of this theme and I can, it will better fit over there. And a few minutes later, Phyllis puts her hand up again and she goes, well, how will I know we're at that point? And he said, I'll jump up and down and I'll say, yeah, we're here now. So he just, well, again, was very playful, very personable, and just wanted to make sure everybody got it the way it was. And one of the questions many people would say, how will I know it's the voice of Jesus instead of my own mind? And he would always laughingly say, that's easy. If the Holy Spirit has a Jewish accent, you'll know it's him, which of course everybody chuckled, but yeah. All right. And he also reminded us oftentimes to think about being in the audience, observing the play that's going on, and you're sitting in the audience holding the hand of Jesus. And that's how we get through this process. All right, that's enough about Kenny. All right, so we are going to now move on to a couple of people. These were just little excerpts I found. There was a woman named Rosemary Lozano. She worked at the foundation for years and years and years and years. She had been a Catholic person and eventually found the course and had difficulties transitioning, like myself, to the new way of believing, but she was very drawn to the course. She described, she was an editor of most of Ken's books. If you look at the beginning, you'll see thanks to him or thanks to her for editing the books. She taught classes, she taught the weekend classes and then the academies. And the weekend classes were like a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. The academies were week-long, where oftentimes they would rotate different teachers. So I had Rosemary as a teacher, and she was this very soft, nun-like person, very, very gentle. And she shared how Ken ran the foundation. She said there were approximately 22 staff members, including kitchen and maintenance. Ken taught them to look at all of their personal issues, especially their conflicts, and the ways they wanted to be special. Even being special because they worked at the foundation. And here's a real cute story. There was a gal that just started working at the foundation one of the times I was there. And we're saying, oh, isn't this cool that you get to work next to Ken and blah, blah, blah. She said, no, not really. She said, your same stuff happens out there, happens here. She said, I had it because they actually had housing for people. They had like a hotel across the way. And so they had to take care of it. They had to clean, they had to maintain it. And if they had flyers or information, they had to pass them out. So she had started passing them out to half the group. And then somebody said, oh, here's another flyer you need to put in there. So she said, yeah, I'm over there slamming the things in the doorway because she was upset because that's how we are. All right, even being special because they work at the foundation. He suggested for them to always be on the lookout for ways that specialness comes up. Ken told them each individual was like an instrument. In an orchestra, not one being more important than the other. It's about disappearing into the beauty of the music. That's the true meaning of shared rather than separate interests, a situation where it is win-win. And of course, the opposite, where we differentiate ourselves through our unworthiness. Again, it doesn't matter if I'm especially good or if I'm especially bad, as long as I am special. Letting go of specialness is like going through withdrawal because it is an addiction. Ken suggested that she be more honest about her motivations for doing things, even for being nice or helpful, and to help us see things differently and learn how to relate and be aware of the guilt surrounding it. The course is here to help us learn to be really honest about what we're doing with everyone. She goes on to share, Ken always had tons of things going on all the time. Although no matter how busy he was always fully present for whoever was sitting across the table from him. His spiritual depth left Rosemary speechless at times, but he never thought it was a big deal or something to talk about. He never judged me, no matter where I was on my journey. Sometimes that was obviously quite difficult for those who work so closely with him. When he died, she remembered that he used to talk about don't stay with the symbol, the body. Go right to the source, which is the content of the love in the mind. When she thinks of asking him a question, she now approaches him in her mind. Not as a symbol, as a body, but in the mind. You can't lose love. Join with the love within and let it come through, and just get out of the way and stay aware of anything that intrudes on that. And this is another story from another gal that taught there as well. She said, this is our classroom and we are responsible for it. Make choosing Jesus as your teacher your first thought of the day, and to think of it throughout the day. And we know in chapter 30, it says, begin again, start with the morning, say a prayer, ask for connection, and then if you lose your way, keep bringing it back. Make your role as pupils of Jesus the most important thing. Ken often talked about making the first order of business the idea that this was my classroom, where I learn my lessons of forgiveness and my eventually remembering God. She shared the difficulty after Ken passed away of looking at his picture and feeling very sad. And then it occurred to her, maybe I should get rid of the picture instead of making me sad. But the thought came to her, well, instead of that, why don't you think about his gentleness? And every time you look at the picture, think of gentleness, not of sadness. And she also said that she thought about the lines from the Course, where it says, teach not that I died in vain, teach rather that I did not die, by demonstrating that you live in me. She would think, well, I'm certainly not demonstrating that you live in me because I'm still feeling sad, or any other adjective you might add to that. And that Ken was always happy and he always had a smile. So these small awarenesses help to take us home. Now, and you asked about anybody in relationship, Jason, this is Gloria, Ken's wife. She was a student and a teacher of the course before she met Ken. She heard him speak and knew that he was deeply ingrained in the course. And it took a while for them to connect, but eventually they did marry in 1991. Gloria was very devoted to Ken and the course, and was very intent on the idea of starting a foundation with Ken, because she saw that he needed a vehicle to work on his writings and teachings, and their garage was becoming very cramped. Helen had also visioned a learning teaching center as a white temple with a gold cross on top, a place where the message of Jesus would be manifested. They started in a smaller facility in Crompton, New York. Ken began offering classes on specific topics like special relationships. They very quickly outgrew that location due to housing, parking, etc. Then they moved to Roscoe, New York in 1988. The foundation is about 120 miles from New York City, and was situated on a 95 acres surrounding a beautiful Tanahana Lake in the Catskill Mountains. And the first time we went there, a number of the people were joggers, so they all left to go jogging and they didn't come back for hours and hours. And my daughter was one of them, but they eventually found, I think somebody gave them a ride or something. The foundation did. There was somebody that was studying the course that had a significant amount of money, and they offered to help pay for it. It provided a peaceful, and we're getting really close. It provided a peaceful and meditative setting in which students could pray, study, and reflect. The purpose was to help students of A Course in Miracles to deepen their understanding of its thought system and of Jesus' teaching in their own lives. Since teaching forgiveness without experiencing it is empty. One of the foundation's specific goals was to help facilitate the process whereby people would be better able to know that their sins are forgiven and that they are truly loved by God. Thus is the Holy Spirit able to extend his love through them to others. Gloria was very different from Ken. She was much more like Helen, actually. She was a bit harsh. She taught classes sometimes too. And one day I remember she walked in and said, "I'm a Venetian from Venice or wherever. I don't know. Tell me what the Course in Miracles is about." And people would be like, but she had a true devotion, not only to the foundation, to the work, and to Ken. And she continued to help edit his books, co-authored some of them, taught classes with Ken, and helped to run the foundation, and even prepare some of the meals at the foundation. The foundation moved to Temecula in 2001, and Ken passed in 2013. And Gloria wanted to keep the foundation going, so she asked the staff if they would be willing to teach and support the foundation, and they all said yes. And it was important for her to keep making Ken's material available even after his passing. Gloria continued to support the foundation until her passing in 2022. All right, so Judith Skutch, who I spoke about earlier, who was one of the 4 pillars, she had a group towards the end of her life that was called the Slow Learners Group, because, and this is a foundational person, thank you. This was a foundational person in the group, and yet even at the end of her life, she was calling herself a slow learner. And I think that should give us some comfort in the fact that even those that were involved in the course still struggle and still are challenged to apply this in their lives. She said this is a Course in Miracles, not the Course in Miracles. There's many paths. Choose one that works for you. And Ken Wapnick would say, the essence of forgiveness is looking with the Holy Spirit and Jesus, non-judgmental gentleness and patience at your ego thought system. It is guilt that prevents us from looking at our specialness, thus sustaining the ego and keeping its true nature hidden. It is looking without judgment at our attack thoughts that undoes the ego. Thus, looking at the ego with guilt and fear, without guilt and fear, is the essence of atonement. And one last comment from Bill Thetford. We are all angels with amnesia. We are the radiance of our true self. We can never change or be tarnished in any way. We are assured in the Course, your worth is established by God. Nothing you do or think or wish or make is necessary to establish your worth. And I will add, and of course, we need to apply that to our brothers as well. Yep.
Gloria died, but how old ago was and I think it was talking to Gloria's son. Is
that is possible. Gloria's son has taken over the foundation. Jeff Siebert is the only remaining teacher that is teaching at the Now Foundation that's in Nevada, in which I meant to see what the dates were on there, but I didn't. So yes, her son has taken over the running of the foundation now.
Oh, the foundation's no longer active on that?
No, it is in Nevada now. It's just a small
Your
little,
son now.
yes,
Okay.
correct, yeah. I'm sure Gloria made sure things were, all the dots were dotted and the Ts were crossed before she chose to leave. So I hope you've enjoyed this journey of 50 years of Course in Miracles, and keep on working on what's working for you, kids. Thank you. So we will conclude with our prayer. So everybody take a nice big deep breath and let it all go. Forgive us our illusions, Father, and help us to accept our true relationship with you, in which there are no illusions and where none can ever enter. Our holiness is yours. What can there be in us that needs forgiveness when yours is perfect? The sin of forgiveness is only your unwillingness to remember your forgiveness and your love. Let us not wander into temptation, but live.
Yeah, fine.
Many words here. Only what you have given, and accept but this into the minds that you've
Yeah,
created.
with the both of our.
Amen. All right, very good. You're
Amen, amen, amen. Thank you.
welcome. Glad you were here today, so I wondered if you would come.
Yes, beautiful. In the sanctuary with the saints.
There you go. Come on.
Love you guys.
Take care. Thanks. Sorry we took you over, but you guys talk to